Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and thank you for stopping by once again. I hadn't expected to be doing a video on December 24th, just before Christmas, but I've gotten some emails and some mentions here and there, and people asking questions, and so I thought I would at least put this up. I'm going to have to do it in segments, and the lighting will probably change. It will look a little odd, but I've got to put it together while I can today, and then get it off and hope that it's of use to you. So with that in mind, I just want to say that what's happened is that there was a report that came out regarding Americans relocating overseas, and that is what caused me to think that I should say something. Now, I do want to just add one thing that most of you already know. This website is about Panama. It is not an American website. Just because I happen to be an American is not important. It is indeed open to everybody, and I know I have so many viewers from all over the world, particularly Europe, from Asia, from elsewhere in Latin America, and so forth. So please bear with me. I think that some of the information I share might be of interest to you as well, and I think we'll end up with something that will be really useful for everybody to know. So with that in mind, I'm going to stop now, and I will be back in just a moment. What led me to put together this video today was a link that was up on the Drudge Report, Matt Drudge's webpage. Many of you are familiar with Mr. Drudge, and he puts up a list of links to a whole variety of different articles and resources that interest him. Nothing wrong with that, and a lot of people go and take a look at what he has to offer each day. This particular link was only up for a couple of days or so. It's a small one, but because he has such massive readership, a number of people did see it, and it did get around. And it has to do with a sort of an unusual announcement being made about a survey taken of Americans relocating overseas by two professors, one in the United States and one in the UK. The announcement actually came out of the UK. It was interesting after a fashion. I went to take a look at it. It sounds as if they're discovering something very new, but the survey itself is a very small one, 877 people. There's nothing wrong with that if the sample has been selected very carefully. But when you have that small number, then you have a greater margin of error. It's still not unusual in polling to have a smaller number like that, especially when funds are tight. It gives you 4% one way or the other, basically, in terms of accuracy. And most of what was referred to in this report didn't require anything really much more than that, assuming, again, that the sample was well chosen. The report stated that 1/3 of Americans had said they had thought about relocating overseas, and that was what had drawn so much attention. Oh, 1/3 of Americans are thinking about relocating overseas. What a big surprise. This, by the way, was in 2014 when the survey was taken, and here I am, almost going on 5 years later. This is news? Anyhow, my immediate reaction was, that's not important. And looking at some of the statistics come up with, I'm very concerned about it, the survey and how it was put together. But anyhow, I'm sure they did their very finest work, and they did their best. But to begin with, the fact that 1/3 of Americans have thought about relocating overseas is hardly shocking. I really like what Elon Musk is doing. I hope he makes it to Mars. I can sit there and think about what it would be like to live on Mars, and actually that would be a great kick. But it's been, being 73 years old and over 50 years since I last sat in an astrophysics classroom, I don't think I'm likely to be going anytime soon. But I can think about it. And I know that in my travels to 45 countries I've worked in around the world throughout my life, it's just something I did. Each place I went to, I would stop and think, what would it be like to live here? And a few of them I actually lived in, but most of them I was there as a consultant for a few weeks. And I'd still think about it. It's not uncommon. I suspect that you, when you've been traveling outside your country to any place, you might stop and think, what would it be like to live here? So to think about relocating overseas and living overseas is perfectly common. There's nothing the least bit unusual about it. Now, what I think disturbed me the most about the survey, though, beyond the fact that it's dated, it's small, the way in which it is presented isn't particularly overwhelming. Some of the results, the few that they do offer, concern me. I can't see the entire report because I have to pay $36 to see it. I'm not about to pay $36 to see a poll taken back in 2014. See, the reason is I've done them. I've done a lot of polls. I've done over 30. I was an editor of a publication on the net, and we did those. But 9 of them were specific to relocation overseas. So the very subject that these professors are talking about is one that I'm very familiar with, and taking opinion surveys and polls and what have you, I'm very familiar with. Between 2005 and 2011, I contracted for 9 of them to be done. They were done professionally. The smallest one had 2,000 respondents. The largest had 25,000. There was another with 20,000 and so forth. We had very large polls because we wanted to get as wide a different variety of opinions, but also the different nations people were going to. I wasn't concerned with Panama specifically. It was wherever Americans were interested in traveling and relocating. And we took a lot of care to try to narrow that down. We weren't just trying to get everybody who was interested. We never would have asked them what they thought about, whether they ever thought about relocating. We wanted something more specific than that. And so it is that we approached it in that manner. We got quite a bit of very interesting information. It caused somewhat of a stir at the time. I wrote 2 articles for Barron's, the financial publication in the U.S., on the subject in 2007 and again in 2011. I was on CNBC back in 2007 when Aaron Burnett was in CNBC, interviewed on the subject. And I've been interviewed by media all over the world, especially in those early years. So I am very much familiar with it. And although we stopped in 2011 because, frankly, I had paid for the last 2, 3 polls because my company, which had originally paid for them, we closed it down. I'd moved down here. My business partner had moved down and bought a house here in Panama, too. So we didn't have a company. So I did it myself because I am intensely interested in this. I'm just very fascinated by seeing the changes that are going on in people's attitudes toward living outside their home country, and in this case, Americans. So this subject is not exactly new. And I want to share with you how we approach, to give you an idea of how it's done, just as background. And then once we have that out of the way, I want to introduce to you the poll that came out just 2 weeks ago, which is much more relevant, I think, certainly far more up to date, and rather stunning, surprising in its results, that I really think should be getting the people's attention, as opposed to any of my old ones or this one as well. So that will be in the next segment. When you do a survey, as the ones we did, it's very common to ask what's called a gateway question. And that's what the first question people seek. And typically, you're looking for information from a particular group of people out of the total population. In order to get to them, though, you have to have a survey that goes out to a good sample of the total population. You don't know where to find these people yet. So you go to the total and you ask these basic questions. Are you interested in this, or are you not? If you are, then they go on to answer other questions. If those are simply not interested in it, then they are dropped at that point, so that you can focus in on the people that you're really concerned about. So without spending a lot of time on this, in our surveys we used a gateway question. It would lead to 20, 30, 40 additional questions, but only if they pass the gateway question. I want to show you now a gateway question so you will see what it looks like, at least one that we used. Now, you can see from the question, are you planning to relocate to another nation for more than 2 years? I mean, we were trying to put aside people who were just going over for 1 year in education, a university or something, or like me, a Peace Corps volunteer for a couple of years. We were interested in people who actually were relocating, and we used the word relocate, which that seems to be the most successful word to use. And then we followed it up by saying, other reasons other than the requirements of the military, the government, or your job. Now, these people are perfectly legitimate people, of course, But they're not the people we were looking at. They're going because they have to go. We don't know whether they want to or not. We were focusing in on people who were going for an extensive period of time, even if they didn't know exactly how long, and who were doing it voluntarily, not because somebody else had put them in a position where if they wanted to be employed, they had to go. So that's our gateway question. And the first three answers were pretty standard right across the board for our surveys. Those who were actually planning to do that, those who were very seriously considering it, and those who were somewhat seriously considering it. The fourth question there was a new one that we created out of experience. We have in Panama a group of people, it's just one example, and it's not just Panama, that attracts people from the United States and Canada during the winter months. They're called snowbirds. They fly south for the winter. And they will actually often get visas, residency visas, like everybody else, like myself, and they will, in this case, will purchase a home down here. They won't just rent because that can be difficult to so on. So if they have the means, they purchase a house. So they have a residency visa. They have a home down here. They spend 4 to 6 months of the year here. They may be intending eventually to come down and live here permanently and so forth. But there was really no answer for them to respond to because they don't want to, the two no's at the end don't fit them, and the three yeses before it aren't really expressing their situation. So one of the things you do in this business is you learn how to add categories here or there. You don't do it for everybody, you can't, but you're trying to hit the main ones, and that one turned out to be a significant one, so we were very pleased to have included it. But that gives you an idea of the gateway question. Now, the group or the survey that the Drudge Report had a link to, and you'll get that link later, they were talking about people who were thinking about moving overseas. Well, a third, I think said were seriously interested, or were considering it, thinking about it. Well, I think they said have thought about it. Well, folks, I love Mars. I love what Elon Musk is doing. I really love to be up there. I can think of myself as being on Mars, but I suspect at 73 years of age and just over half a century since I sat and studied astrophysics in university, I doubt very seriously that I have any use to them anymore. So I don't expect to get an invitation. So, but I can think about that. And I know when I traveled around the world, you know, I've done 40, 45 different nations. Each one I would stop and think, what would it be like to live here? So I'd think about that. I think a lot of people, when they're on vacation, they go outside their home country, wherever that is, and wherever they're going, and think, would I want to live here? So thinking about relocation, it means nothing, absolutely nothing. So a third of Americans have thought about relocation overseas. Well, big deal. So you see the importance of choosing your audience, knowing what it is you want to get from them, who they are, and then asking the right kind of question to get the right kind of people. So that's that. That's just an idea of how it is done. Now I'm going to go on and I'm going to talk about another poll that has just been recently released, and it is the one that's as far as I'm concerned, is the only one of all the polls discussed so far that's really worth focusing on. So here we go. The poll that particularly interests me was one that was presented publicly on December 10th of 2018, 2 weeks ago from my filming this particular video. And it's put out by the Gallup poll. Now, a lot of you probably have heard of the Gallup poll and so forth. You may not be aware that they're a huge institution. They're global in scope. They have offices all over the world. They collect information in 160 different nations. Most of their work has nothing to do with politics. They're usually looking at economic issues. They're looking at business issues. They're looking at social issues that are of interest to people globally. A whole wide variety. They're extremely professional. I'm familiar with their work. I think they do a very, very fine job. And they've been doing it for 85 years, which is a pretty long period of time, so they know what they're doing. Among other things, and perhaps the single one poll that interests me the most is called their World Poll. And the most recent iteration of that, which is we're talking about today, was a poll taken in 152 nations with over 450,000 people responding. That's pretty big. And in that massive questions they ask, and so many different issues, there's one on relocation. Now, the wording of it is such, though, that it leads me to believe that they aren't particularly interested in whether or not Americans are moving to Panama, for example. They are much more concerned, I think, with those people that we normally talk about when we talk about migration. People who are very poor in economic trouble, or who their countries are split by war and they're trying to get away from it and everything else. They're leaving. They're leaving probably forever. I mean, they don't have a lot of money. They're just going and they're hoping and praying for a better life. All right, these folks, and so they don't have a gateway question because they only have one question on relocation, but it's worded in such a way that it seems to me this is who their real audience is. And I want to take a look at that with you today. Get it up here. This is a most unusual question. There's nothing that we would ever think of asking. Ideally, that's an important word. That means put aside all questions about whether you have enough money to do this and so forth and whatever. But if you had the opportunity, would you like to move permanently to another country, or would you prefer to continue living in this country? Now, the capitalization of permanently is their work, not mine. They're emphasizing this. This is not just for somebody who's decided to spend a few years somewhere and then maybe go home or maybe not. They're talking about people actually leaving permanently or wanting to leave permanently. And they take away any of the barriers like money and so forth that would intervene with that, to get a sense of how many people in a country like Guatemala, how many people really want to move permanently to some other country. But not just there. They asked exactly the same questions in all 152 nations, and they use over 200 languages to do it. It's an extremely sophisticated poll, and they put a terrific amount of work and resources into it. And this one has been reported now 5 times. Since its first time, it was reported in 2007. We had, since they started polling, I should say, for the World Poll in 2007. We'd been operating since 2005. By 2007, we were steaming along. We'd done a lot of our polling. We were the only ones doing it at that time, and continued to be really certainly the only ones who had done it at a large scale and on a regular basis over time, until along comes Gallup. And that was very, very useful. I was very pleased that somebody else was asking. But the question, that's a pretty exciting question. And I was really stunned the first time that I saw it. I thought, wow, permanently? And I think what just amused me or interested me or whatever was the response from countries with which I'm very familiar. Now, they aren't looking to talk about one country or another. So they present the results as a trend over time for regions, and a region like the EU, the European Union, will have 28 nations in it. Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, these are regions with multiple nations. So you can look at the Latin American figures and have no idea where Panama fits in there. They're one country covered, or Brazil, or Mexico, or any other, because they're all put together. And that's the purpose, is to show these trends regionally. There are some different regions there, and since I'm going to be showing you this particular result, the poll results, I want to mention, I'm going to take a moment right now, and I'm going to show you 3 regions that they use that may not be familiar to everybody. And over here you can see them, the Commonwealth of Independent States. That's an association of states, but the important thing you need to know is that is the former Soviet Union, Russia, and the many other republics that were created after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So that's what the Commonwealth of Independent States refers to. They added Oceania more recently in the last 3 polls. This is Australia, New Zealand, and small Pacific Island nations. And then finally, you see the rather unusual title there of Northern America. Now, North America is Canada, the United States, and Mexico. That's just accepted globally. However, for the purposes of this poll, Gallup understands naturally that Mexico has a linguistic and cultural heritage that links it very much to Latin America, so they included it in the Latin American region, leaving only the U.S. and Canada in North America, and they call it, therefore, Northern America. It's just an indicator to people who are in the business looking at this that they're talking about something different than the today's standard definition of North America. That's all. So it can be a little surprising when you first see it. Now, over time, as you will soon see, the poll results on this question about permanent relocation can change. And you'll notice that the United States and Canada are 10%. You might think that's a shocking total. 10% would actually, given ideal circumstances, would want to move permanently. Well, first question I had for them, and I called back in 2011 when I first made contact with them, I said, is there any difference between the U.S. and Canada? And they said, no, there's no difference at all. They're the same. Okay, and that 10%, as you will soon see, is not an especially high figure. Now, this question is totally different than anything we ever asked. They are going for a different audience, so to speak, although there will be overlap between this audience and our audience in some countries, like the United States. But nonetheless, they're quite radically different. They're also very stable. And that was the key thing. When we did ours, those three yes answers I gave you, that pretty much were fairly stable over time. Within those answers would be one might gain more 1 year, more were actually planning to relocate, and fewer were at the stage of seriously considering, and so on, back and forth. But generally speaking, overall, it was fairly stable. At Gallup, through the first 4 of their 5 polls, the one region that was absolutely stable was Northern America, U.S. and Canada, until this last poll results, which were those that were presented on December 10th. And as you might imagine, I go in, and when I see them every time when they come out, I go right in and I take a look down to see what U.S. and Canada, and I see 10, 10, 14. I thought, 14? Where did 14 come from? 14, that's a 40% increase. I mean, I thought I'd better ask them if Canada or the U.S. are the same now. Well, they answer that in the text a little bit later. No, Canada's remained the same. The United States is the one that's changed, and it's risen to 16. So from 10% to 16%, 10%, time after time after time after time, total stability, and suddenly 16%. Wow. And what suddenly isn't quite the right word. It was in 2016 and 2017, according to their text, that this became the case, or where it really jumped up. Now, they've done a 2018 survey, too. But the critical thing, I'll get to that, but the critical thing here is that this kind of change is extraordinarily unusual. I mean, there's no way anybody who deals with polling, who's familiar with the world poll, who's been following it all these years, as I have and so on, isn't going to sit there and go, what? How did that happen? What's the purpose? What's the reason for this? So I contacted them again, and I said, I was surprised, and they responded, yeah. Well, the lady, very nice lady that I talked to who works on that team said, yes, we were surprised too, but we are looking into it in greater detail, and we expect to prepare more reports. So keep your eyes open. There'll be more to come. And I thought, yes, okay, thank you. And that's all I expect. I mean, this is their own private business. It's their own results. So I'm delighted to at least know that they're working on this. And I suspect their 2018 report will be part of their explanation. I don't know. We'll see. But there is coming, I would guess, after the new year, when the vacation's over and things are quieted down a bit, we should be getting a report from Gallup on what they found as the reasons, or their best estimate of the reasons for this sudden and very dramatic increase. And that's what really interested me. So here it is. It's been out there for a couple weeks. Gallup's a big outfit. Their reports are read. Why this has not popped up on other channels, other publications, I don't know. I really do think that sometimes it's just pure coincidence. People happen to come across stuff because there's so much information out there. So here you have a little tiny survey, good one though it may have been at the time, in 2014. It gets all of a sudden a lot of notice, and you have something that's really, really on the same topic, Americans relocating, that says, wow, something very significant has happened. If I had the money, I would go out and do one of our polls too, because although our audiences, so to speak, are not exactly the same, there's some overlap, but more importantly, if in the general society there's this dramatic increase, I would expect certainly some reflection of that increase in our the answers to our poll questions. Were we in a position financially to do this again? We're not. I paid for the last few of the surveys myself because my company we'd closed it down. I'd moved here. My business partner had moved to Panama too. So there was no more company. So I was so interested in the business that the last couple, 3 polls there, I financed out of my own pocket. And I can't do that anymore. It's just too much money. But I was so pleased that Gallup came along, at least it provided some additional information. Now they provide this, and there's more to come. So that's the real information, if you're concerned. If something has happened, I have no question in my mind about that. I can guess, you could guess, but that can be very, very seriously wrong. You may think political things immediately. That's a very dangerous assumption to make because it hasn't worked out that way in the past. We will see when we see, and Gallup will tell us what it can tell us, and when it does, then I'm going to share the results with you. But for all of you, I think for the people who are not Americans who go in and look at the survey, your nation's included in one of the regions there. Take a look at it. See, if you think 10% is high, it may not be as high as it is in your own region. You may be quite surprised. I don't know. Or maybe it's more than that, and so on. At 16, we're now rising up in the ranks, so to speak. But it is something that's important. I suspect very important. We will eventually know about it. I have some feelings about, from talking to people coming down and what have you, is what it might be, but that's conjecture, and there's no room for that. I need to have more facts, and that's what we'll be talking about when they become available. But for the moment, I wanted you to know that. And I also say to non-Americans, I say, keep in mind that, like it or not, often when things like this happen in the U.S., they spread. So it may be something, it may not, but it might be something that catches on even more so than it already is in your region. Heaven alone knows. I'm not here to make predictions. But I'm saying this is of interest. It's big news from the U.S. perspective, and for those of us who are interested in relocation, I wanted to add it. You're now ahead of the game. You're way ahead of 99.99999% of the people out there who are absolutely unaware of this, should be aware of it. It will be interesting. So I will do that. When it comes up, I will be immediately in here with a video on it. I can assure you that will happen. I may share with you some of the stuff we also collected in the old surveys, and not on the percentage who were planning to relocate. I mean, these things change over time. But some of the work we did in trying to get an idea, the profile of different kinds of people who relocate and those who do not, might be of interest to you because they're very possibly going to hold true even in later times. So if there's interest in that, I'll mention it. But this is definitely not going to become standard. This is a website about Panama. Now, I will finish off by saying what I have to say, and that is that this website is about Panama. It is about relocation. I've considered this to be significantly associated with that, so I would raise it today, particularly since people have been writing since they've heard about this other study. Otherwise, I might never have mentioned a word about it, okay? Above all, though, this is not a political site. If you have a very strong, angry comment to make about it, or an accusation, or you feel somebody's responsible for this, I don't care. It's your business. Take it somewhere else, because there is a place where that's going to be very interesting. I'm going to give you the links down below so that you can do with it as you see fit. But here I insist that people be polite, that questions and reasonable discussions are perfectly legitimate things, but I do not allow anything up that's partisan politically and that is could be offensive or insulting to anybody else. It is not worth it, particularly when it's in regards to one nation outside, in this case, the United States. So if you do want to comment, please feel free to. If it doesn't show up, well, that's why, probably. And forgive me for that, but that's the way it operates and always has operated here at this site. This is about Panama. For those of you who have come in and seen this and you think you would be interested, click on the subscribe button. And beside it, you can strike on the little bell sign. It will ring the bell, and that tells YouTube you want to be notified immediately when a new video goes up. And so when I do get one up on this particular topic, you're going to hear about it immediately. If you don't, then you hear about it when they get around to letting you know. If they do, and sometimes they just don't do it because, they just don't. YouTube's sort of difficult to work with sometimes. But clicking on the bell does help. You can always unclick it at any time, and you can always unsubscribe at any time. There's no money involved with this, and I don't make a penny off it. There's no way to do that, and so I don't care. I mean, whether I have 1, 100, or 1,000 doesn't make any difference to me at all. The key thing is I just provide stuff. If it's of interest and useful to you, all the better. And it will be focused almost entirely on Panama, with occasional times like this when I think something is relevant that's broader based than just about Panama itself. So on that cheerful note, I want to thank you for putting up with this rather long presentation. I hope you found it interesting. The links below, I'll give you one to Gallup, just a general overview for those who are not familiar with it. Then I will also include one to the most recent poll. They show 3 of the 5 polls that have been done. I also will give a link to an announcement years ago that showed the other 2. They didn't put all 5 up this time because they changed the Asian regions. They broke them up differently, so they don't want to compare different regions and all that. So, but you will see the American ones, what I'm talking about, the 10, 10, 10, 10, 14 sort of business, you will see it that way. I like you to be able to verify what I'm talking about. And I'll put in the link to the story that appeared at the Drudge Report. So maybe that's helpful to you all. In the meantime, and in between time, thank you so much for stopping by. I hope you've had a decent year. I know mine's been wild and woolly sometimes, sometimes great and sometimes not so great, but I'm looking forward to 2019. I hope we can all enjoy the best year of our lives coming right around the corner. Happy New Year to you all.